The Anthony Davis experiment has not worked out, making this Luka Doncic trade look even worse than it did when it happened about a year ago. At time of recording, being January 4th of 2026, the Dallas Mavericks are 13-23, putting them as the 11th seed out west. Not even a play-in team. They look more like a lottery team, and they have a higher chance of being a lottery team than being a playoff team. And remember, this Anthony Davis trade was made after Luka brought the Mavs to a finals trip, and supposedly this is supposed to be a contender built around defense, yet they are a bottom feeder in the running once again for potentially a number one pick if things don't change. Now, there have been a ton of rumors on Anthony Davis being moved already, and that the Mavericks will build around Cooper Flagg instead, with their main target in a trade revolving around a young player. We've seen Jonathan Kuminga and we've seen Zachary Richardson as the two names floated around. However, I think that there are a few other potential landing spots for Anthony Davis that would make sense for both parties. Today, we're going to go through some potential trade ideas for Anthony Davis for both the Warriors and the Hawks. But again, I have a couple different teams that I think it would make sense for them to trade for Anthony Davis. Let's get into it. So if you can't tell, I'm enjoying that I got a keyboard and a mouse that are USB-C and can connect to my MacBook. So I am now using my gaming monitor a lot as a secondary monitor for my computer. Now I have a laptop. I have no clue if this is a good idea or not, but eventually I'll end up getting an actual desktop where I'm not going to kill my computer to do stuff like this. So as you can see, the current setup I have is our first team being the Golden State Warriors, surrounded by an Anthony Davis and Jonathan Kuminga trade. Now, obviously, money-wise, this is not going to work out 1-to-1, and we are going to ignore when it does say failed, because it will for a decent amount of these trades, because of January 15th being when a lot of players can be traded once again, especially with the Jonathan Kuminga trade. And there are some other players that we're going to potentially be looking at that it's not going to work because of this. So we are just going to be worrying about the allowable amount. If those are green, then that means that it should, in theory, work as far as I can tell. Again, I've said this before. I've done some of these videos about trades. I'm not in NBA front offices to know exactly what 100% all the rules are. I think I know most of the rules, but there are still some that I'm not 100% sure on. So what else can we do to make this financially make sense and realistically make sense for both teams? I don't see the Warriors doing anything beyond just a 3-player swap for Anthony Davis, obviously with some picks, but as we can see, the financials just simply wouldn't work, which is where we'd have to get another team involved. This is the closest I can get with these two teams, and you saw the Warriors over $10 million in their allowable incoming amount, and this is going to be the problem for this team to pull this off. Again, I'm sure front offices can do something, but $10 million does feel like a lot, and this is where I think a team such as the Bulls could potentially come into play. They do have Nikola Vucevic on the last year of his deal, potentially could be somebody the Warriors add. And again, I'm looking at a guy like a Kobe White for the Dallas Mavericks to potentially go add, and they move off of potentially a Buddy Hield in this situation, and even potentially a Moses Moody in this situation. And $404,000, I'm sure that there is something that NBA front offices can do to make that number disappear. However, is this very realistic? Quite frankly, I don't think so. I don't see why the Warriors would be interested in doing something like this. Again, you are giving up 6 players to add 1. I don't know what the picks look like. Obviously, we can add some picks, but now you have to go fill out a roster. To get this version of this done, you would have to find 4 players at the minimum. And by the way, you have $1 million to do all that. And granted, you can go over 4 minimum contracts, but now you have a whole roster where you're getting guys off the street in mid-January, and you've gutted your whole future. I mean, Pods is gone, Kuminga's gone, Buddy Hield is gone. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily consider him a young player, but he's on the younger side. Moses Moody is gone. I mean, for players under 25, you've Quentin Post, Guy Santos, and Trace Jackson Davis left, and Will Richard, and that is it. Does not seem like a bright future when this core would be 37, 36, 35, and 32. I don't think this is very realistic for the Warriors to pull off in any sort of scenario. Again, I don't think the Mavs have a problem with doing something like this. If you want to go young, I think you end up moving Al Horford and D'Anthony Melton holding on to Pods, holding on to Kuminga, holding on to Kobe White. But these two guys are more than likely going to be moved on from. I just don't want to add a fourth team to this trade, try and make that work. So I think the Warriors is more of a long shot compared to the next team that we'll try and trade with. And that team is the Atlanta Hawks. They have interest in Zachary Richardson, and 1-to-1, obviously they would not do this, but $40 million is what they would have to come up with. Not crazy. You could throw in Trae Young to make that work. They're probably not letting Jalen Johnson go whatsoever. They have a lot of contracts to play with, where you have Luke Kennard, you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you have Kristaps Porzingis, and financially, now you're $4 million the other way, but this lays the groundwork of what could potentially be done to get this to work. I think Kristaps Porzingis is potentially the most unrealistic part of this, but I don't see them moving on from Onyeka Okongwu. I don't see them moving on from Dyson Daniels. I don't see them moving on from Jalen Johnson. So Kristaps Porzingis financially is the only guy that can move and can make this work. And once again, you get another team involved. And this is where I think, honestly, a team like the Boston Celtics, their season is going a lot better than they thought it would. Do they potentially trade back for Kristaps Porzingis? This is probably very unrealistic, right? But I mean, 1.9 million, 3 million, there's got to be a minimum contracts that you can make that work. Do they go get Kristaps Porzingis right back? Because this season, without Jason Tatum, has them as the 3 seed at 19 and 12. So there's still a very competitive team. Because remember, they traded all these players away to try and get under that second apron because they did not think they'd be able to compete this year with Jason Tatum out. And they didn't want to pay all those taxes. They're competing. They are perfectly competitive without their franchise player. Do they potentially go get their championship center right back? Like I said, I don't know how realistic it is to trade a player, trade back for a player in the same season. However, financially, like I said, you are very close where there's got to be some sort of cap holds or trade exceptions to make that work. And so again, I don't know who necessarily says no here. For the Hawks, you have an interesting pairing with Anthony Davis and Trae Young as your stars. You still have a very good young core in Jalen Johnson, in Onyeka Okongwu, in Dyson Daniels. That starting five does look very solid. It could make it so they could hide Trae Young a little bit better on defense. So I think that is a potentially viable trade. And I don't know if they'd necessarily give up all of these players. However, financially it does make sense. It does make sense with the rumors, with them being willing to move their former number one pick in just year 2 at 20 years old. A fresh start for Research in an environment where it's not necessarily a win now if they do this. Because again, I would assume if Anthony Davis moves, Kyrie's moving, and Clay's moving, potentially even Daniel Gafford, where hey, Cooper Flagg, Research that potentially is a duo in the future. Add in Simons, a player who has had a very solid year. I think it does potentially make sense. And while we're here, one of the teams that I think actually could also trade for Anthony Davis and just skip out all the nonsense with the Atlanta Hawks is the Boston Celtics. I mean, we have established that they are competing very well. I think Anthony Simons could be an interesting player. He is 26, a little bit on the older side in terms of young players that they'd want to get in return. Potentially, Hugo Gonzalez is a player that the Dallas Mavericks would be interested in pairing with Cooper Flagg. And then I think Sam Hauser is a guy that would have to go, and that should get us relatively financially close. You have $13 million that need to be made up. So again, you get into gutting your roster with minimum contracts to make that work. And that's where financially doesn't necessarily make sense. However, it is interesting to think about in terms of this team. You have Anthony Davis, you have Jason Tatum, you have Jaylen Brown for a big three moving forward. And again, $13 million, that is a big number to overcome. So I'm not entirely sure how they would get past that. And I don't want to make all of these 3-4 team trades. So I think this could be the baseline of something that the Boston Celtics could do to add Anthony Davis to the team. Again, you are competing, you do need a big. Anthony Davis potentially could be that guy. And that all comes with if the Dallas Mavericks are interested in Anthony Simons. I mean, if you really wanted to get crazy, maybe Klay Thompson goes with them and they add Derek White. I just don't see them doing that. This actually would be a success because all of these players are already past their exceptions of when they can be traded. Again, I don't know if you add Derek White to get Klay Thompson just makes the money work. I don't think this part is realistic, but we'll see. I think this is a team that should pay close attention to Anthony Davis if they can make that work. And this is one that I think maybe a little bit in left field, but the 76ers, are they done with Joel Embiid? Potentially add Anthony Davis to this core of Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe and all these other young guys. I mean, they still have Jared McCain, although his production hasn't been the same as his rookie year. You have Quentin Grimes, who has been a very solid pickup for them. You have a lot of young guys. However, with all of Embiid's injuries, is it time for them to cut their losses? I think financially this does just work straight up. They actually are over the allowable amount by $1.1 million. So let's throw in Dante Exum just to make it financially work. And what's interesting about this is, what is Joel Embiid's market? Is he a player that they have to attach picks to? Or is he a player that you get picks for trading away? And is Anthony Davis a player that it's reasonable to attach picks to? Who really knows? We did see Anthony Davis have picks attached to him for Luka Doncic. However, Luka Doncic and Joel Embiid at this point in their careers are two different players at two different points in their career and two different levels, although they are both MVP calibers at one point in their career. The only thing stopping this is this a lateral move for the Dallas Mavericks? You get one injured big for another injured big. I don't know. However, it could be potentially a different pairing and could be something that maybe the Sixers do have to attach picks to get it done, and potentially this moves into another move for the Dallas Mavericks. Again, maybe you go hit up the Boston Celtics and you go get an Anthony Simons for a Joel Embiid and you make that work. Or even better, you go get a Jalen Green from the Phoenix Suns for Joel Embiid and you make this work. Maybe you go Jalen Green, Grayson Allen, Mark Williams, and you go get Joel Embiid for the Phoenix Suns to pair with Devin Booker. I don't know. We're way out in left field, more than I thought I'd actually get with this idea when it popped in my head. But maybe this is something that if the Sixers really want Anthony Davis, this is something that can be accomplished. Mavericks get what they want with some young players. Maybe the Suns want to make a playoff push with Devin Booker. This is something that I'm making up on the fly, to be completely honest with you. I honestly don't see the realism in this, kind of with the Warriors. As the more I think about it, it is a lateral move. But like I said, something that I wanted to explore, that I thought financially could make sense, and something that potentially the Sixers could explore. Lastly, I think the Milwaukee Bucks are a team that could check in with Dallas and potentially could have the assets to make it happen. They don't have the young guy that they could potentially be interested in. And this is where I will look into picks, because if they want to hold on to Giannis, I think they need to go all out and maybe throw them Ryan Rollins, say, hey, this guy's worked well for us. Potentially you could turn him into something. Because quite frankly, you look at this roster, he is literally the only young guy on this roster. And you would have to wait till January 15th to do something like this. But hey, Ryan Rollins, Kyle Kuzma, Miles Turner, and a bunch of picks, and you can move Kyle Kuzma and Miles Turner. I'll go make something very quickly. Just tying it back into the Warriors, honestly, this might be a more realistic path for the Warriors to get some help in their big man position. They are $2 million off, but they have enough minimum contracts to make this work. And oh, by the way, the Mavericks still get Jonathan Kuminga. So I think honestly, this is something that they could do. They being the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis and AD is very interesting. You do have two pure power forwards. I don't know if AD would want to play the center alongside Giannis. I don't know if Bobby Portis plays the center. Maybe AD or Giannis slides up to the 3. Probably Giannis. But I think it's worth something other than the current roster where it is Giannis on an island. And this is a team that is 13-19 as of January 4th and outside of the playoffs. So this could be a team that wants to make a push. Going through this activity for longer than truly I thought I would. Realistically, the only teams I think that make a good case of the teams that we looked at are the Atlanta Hawks and the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks. Although Golden State is relatively highly connected, I just don't see the realism for them to pick up another $50 million plus contract alongside all of their core members. Maybe potentially Draymond Green being moved. I didn't explore that. But I also don't see the path for them. Like I mentioned, with all of their then core players being above 30, I just don't see that working. So I think the Hawks should potentially check in. I think the Boston Celtics honestly really should check in, especially if they're willing to move on from Simons and even potentially Derek White to make that work. And I do think the Milwaukee Bucks should make a swing and try and hold on to Giannis, and adding Anthony Davis should be another player to try and intrigue him to stay. Let me know what your thoughts on all of these trades are. The realism in this, again, I went off the rails a couple times with some of these teams. I also did a lot of thinking out loud and a lot of just playing around that now I have to cut down into a relatively short YouTube video. So it'll be interesting for me to see what I kept and if it portrayed my entire thoughts of all this, because I'm not kidding, this is 30 minutes of me rambling trying to figure out some of these trades, because like I said, I'm not a salary cap guru by any means. So some of these trades may be completely wrong and maybe completely dumb. Please let me know down in the comments what you think of these. Good, bad, indifferent. You could call me the biggest idiot in the world for all I care. I would just love to hear your comments and start a little conversation in the comments below. Subscribe if you're new. Add your thoughts down below on my ideas and potentially any trades you have. And other than that, I'm out. Peace.